Good afternoon. I'd like to call the meeting of the Board of Education to order. The date is April 1st, 2021. We are at First Flight High School, and the time is 12:34. This is a special called meeting. We have all of our board members here, Ms. Kinzel and Dr. Farley with us, and by phone, we have Brian Shaw and board member Susan Bothwell. With that, I will entertain and motion to approve the agenda.
Madam Chair, I move we approve the agenda.
Motion by Mr. Twitty, second by Ms. Lawler. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Dr. Farley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Before we begin, we have a special cameraman running production back there. Michael Pearson is a junior here at First Flight High School. And Michael's in a video production class, and he's working with our team of Steve Blankenberg and Aaron Jennings. So welcome to Michael. So for our agenda for this special called meeting, this will be a shared presentation between myself, Associate Superintendent Sandy Kinzel, and our Director of Innovation, Johanna Parker. I'll start with an overview and updates that have occurred, particularly in the last 2 to 3 weeks. Ms. Kinzel will report on the staff and student COVID-19 vaccinations, quarantine guidelines, and then current data. We will present 3 proposed model shifts to the board. One does have to be adopted so that the board is in line with meeting the mandates in Senate Bill 220. We'll talk about that this afternoon. We're going to go through our March 2021 feedback. We have surveyed parents, K5 and 612, and we've also surveyed DCS staff to get their feedback, which has been significant in our planning process. We'll go through the number of 612 students who have registered following Senate Bill 220 to return to school 4 days a week minimum. And then we'll certainly open the floor up to discussion and questions, and feel free to jump in as we move through the presentation. So first is a way to provide a brief overview. As you know, DCS public schools reopened on March 1st. We've instituted low protocols, which has been restrictive staff contact since we reopened, and that's been very successful. Senate Bill 220 became law on March 1st. DCS is currently meeting the mandates in Senate Bill 220, except for the following provision. A local board shall provide the option to participate in Plan A instruction at least 4 days a week at the discretion of the student's parent or guardian for students who have an individualized education plan or a student with a 504 section plan. So DCS is required and has registered students to provide them with an option to attend 4 days a week. The offer by statute, has to be offered by April 1st, which we've done. And then those students would come back for parents who've chosen that option to start school back on either April 12th or 13th, depending upon the board choice with our options today. In addition to offering students who have IEPs or a 504 plan, we also went above that expectation and standard and have offered the same options for students in 612 who have ESL or ELL plans, and they've also registered. That registration process, and we'll break out a graph later, is resulted in 170 out of a possible 450 students who want to return to school 4 days a week, who are 612, who are in the EC program, have a 504 plan, an ELL plan, or an ESL plan. Continuing with our update, the State Board of Education approved instruction under Plan A, consistent of at least 4 days a week, and instruction under Plan B to quote to the maximum extent possible while maintaining social distancing of 6 feet. So Plan B still does require, as it has during the entire pandemic, to have 6-foot social distancing. Everyone still must be offered a virtual option, so that option is on the table through the end of this school year. There are new provisions and requirements that need to be met should a school or district have to close due to COVID-19 exposures. So if a school were to close, then we have to report that to the, now have to report that to the NCDPI state superintendent. So there's a process for that. Should 6 through 12 schools move to Plan A, we must submit a plan to the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. So should the board vote to move 612 to Plan A, we would submit that plan likely tomorrow. And there's a short registration process that we've received following the state board meeting that occurred 2.5 weeks ago. Transportation in Plan A does not require 1 student per bus seat. So if you recall, during most of the pandemic, the requirement for transportation is to have 1 student per seat unless there is a sibling, and that is no longer a requirement in A. However, at this point, we continue to want to provide that in our transportation plan through the rest of the year. Excuse me. Where that could shift a little bit depends upon the model that's chosen, and if there's a shift in the current instructional program and we have a significant number of bus riders, then we may have to make some adjustments. But we are currently planning on keeping the 1 person per seat procedure in place unless there's a sibling. We do have some buses that have upwards of 30 students on them, not many, and in those cases, in this example, there would be 6 siblings. Further with the overview and updates, 612 schools that moved to Plan A also have a requirement to partner with the ABC Science Collaborative of the School of Medicine at Duke University to collect and analyze data. So to this point, all the data collection that is around students and staff who are confirmed laboratory positive for COVID-19, which you've seen those numbers as we move through time, and the number of students and staff who've been quarantined. That's all local data collection. So if the board decides to move to Plan A for 612, then through the new law that was established when Senate Bill 220 was ratified, we have a requirement to now partner with Duke and the ABC Collaborative, and then the reporting data, it is anonymous, it's centered on students, and then there's a much greater depth of information that gets into number of students tested, was it a positive or a negative, information around quarantine. So that would extend the reporting features that we would have to agree to based on the new law. Daily health screenings are now optional. Dare County Schools does not intend to stop doing those for the remainder of the school year. So we think it's beneficial to our health and safety protocols to continue to do that. Fortunately for Dare County Schools in our community, we've had a very efficient process of collecting the daily health screening. And so we've had a text message that goes out to families and or high school students and staff for the last several months. Typically goes to phones around the district about 6 a.m. and it's very efficient, and it takes about 10 seconds to answer the 3 health screening questions. We will continue to do that. Districts who do not have the infrared temperature technology that we have at our entrances have still been using handheld devices, and I'm sure that has slowed up the process of moving into schools. For Dare County Schools, thanks to support from our county commissioners, we do have these wonderful technology devices that has infrared temperature scans, and we can efficiently move staff and students through the building really without interference. It's smooth, and there's no reason why we need to stop doing that currently. If you recall, when we made the purchase for those devices back in the fall, or actually late summer, we also informed the board that we can use those and change around some of the technology in that platform, and we can convert them in the future when we get past, hopefully, temperature screens, and it's not required now, is a way to check in visitors. So we'll continue to look at ways that we can use those in the future. The mass gathering limit in Governor Cooper's latest executive order, which is Executive Order 204, has been raised from 25 to 50. So an example of how that impacts schools would be in this setting. At some point, the board could decide to have 50 participants in the setting versus the previous restriction of 25. DCS athletics, also as a function of Executive Order 204, can now move up to 50% capacity for the audiences. So that's in indoor and outdoor venues. And it's a small item, but it's not a small item if you've been cleaning playground equipment. Small in the big picture, but one of the latest health tool updates has been there's no longer that need to sanitize playground equipment. The science has advanced and we've known more about COVID-19. So at this point, I'm going to turn to Associate Superintendent Sandy Kinzel, and she is going to provide us with staff and student COVID-19 vaccine and data updates. Sandy?
Thank you, Dr. Farley. Good afternoon, board members. It's a pleasure to be here with you again today. I think that within the overview that Dr. Farley just gave you, I think there's a lot of good news. We're moving in a positive direction based on the metrics in the state, and we're going to continue to share some of that good news because some of the processes and requirements that we've been following are obviously producing positive results, allowing us to have some of these conversations today. So looking at several of the factors that have contributed to some of the success protocols in our schools and our classrooms, again, trying to mitigate some of the spread or the potential exposure for our staff. We had talked when we first closed and went back to remote back in February, we had a terrible staffing problem. So we had to put some measures in place to help us address that if we were going to be able to reopen successfully. Since that time, vaccines have been made available to us beginning in January, and that also has contributed to not only helping us to maintain our staff, but it has given everyone a little boost of confidence in that the vaccine is going to help protect them from contracting and becoming ill from the virus if they happen to catch it. And then, of course, the social distancing that has been, along with our hybrid scheduling from grades 6 through 12, allowing to have that social distancing if and when a positive case came up in the 6 through 12 classrooms, we were able to significantly reduce the quarantining because we could have confidence that they were not within that 6-foot range for 15 minutes or more, which is part of the direct contact tracing definition. So on this slide, just again want to reiterate some of the information that we have regarding vaccines. And since the first vaccine clinic in January, 85 or more % of our staff have been fully vaccinated and have gone beyond the 2 weeks that allows them to be fully immune to the COVID-19 virus. This is interesting new news shared to us by Dr. Sheila Davies. 200 young adults aged 16 through 18 have received their first dose here in Dare County. Just a little caveat to that. Not all 200 of those young adults are Dare County students. They are required to be able to provide that vaccine to anybody that shows up. So some of those are from neighboring districts. There are about 70 that have registered for the clinic that's scheduled for tomorrow. And again, fully vaccinated individuals are exempt from having to be quarantined. Initially, the science showed that 90 days was all they had data to be able to have confidence behind, and they have now lifted that. And so they are saying that the vaccine will provide immunity beyond 90 days now. And then finally, good news on the next front is that they are testing and anticipate a vaccine that will be recommended for age 12 and older. So again, the more our students and our staff become vaccinated, I think the better we have a chance of being able to fight this off and return to normal. So on the next slide, oh, I'm sorry, yes, on the next slide, here we go. It's just some numbers for you. Again, to kind of reiterate, we had some really good numbers until we had a case last night that kind of blew us out of the water. And it happens. So, you know, we have a pretty good run. Right now, our numbers are, we have one staff member. This is since we reopened in March. Okay, so only one staff member has tested positive. We've had 15 students that have tested positive. 8 staff members have been quarantined, and they've been quarantined because they weren't vaccinated at the time. 196 students have been quarantined, and just to be honest, 50 of those came yesterday. So it has an impact on our elementary classrooms, as you'll see. And then 242 total, and that includes any of the staff members that were tested, staff or students that tested positive, includes any exposures to students or staff, so that's a sum total. Now, when you compare this to data that we had back in January and February, this is significantly lower than what we were experiencing. And I will say that the majority of the student quarantines, 132 of them, I believe, can be attributed specifically to 5 elementary classrooms that had one positive case. And so, again, just to reiterate, while in the elementary school is under Plan A, there's no requirement for that 6-foot social distancing. And so we can't ensure, like we can at 6 through 12 under hybrid, that there's not that close contact. So for the most part, we are looking at quarantining whole classes unless we have a reason and high confidence to exclude someone from the quarantine. So this is the information we have right now on quarantines and positive cases. So on the next one. Okay. All right. Joe, I'm going to ask you to back up. I think I skipped one. The quarantine guidelines that are still in effect. Is the one before that? There you go. Sorry, we got out of order a little bit. So currently, the quarantine guidelines that we have in effect fall under the guidelines, the current guidelines for direct contact. And the direct contact definition has not changed. It is still contact within 6 feet for 15 minutes cumulatively over a 24-hour period. The standard quarantine period is the 14 days from the date of exposure, and that's provided that there are no symptoms exhibited by the individual. Alternative options to reduce the quarantine period were put into effect, and the options were implemented, obviously, to shorten the quarantine period. But there were specific guidelines that had to, and criteria that had to be met in order to be able to allow for a shortened quarantine period. And that was that there was daily symptom checks and that all prevention measures were put in place upon the return of the individual. So that included mask wearing and social distancing. So we were not in a position where we could shorten the quarantine period for anyone at the elementary school because there was no social distancing requirement that was being implemented there. However, at the secondary level, we were able to shorten quarantines 10 days of the quarantine if they had no symptoms reported, and then 7 days could be implemented if there were no symptoms and a negative test result. So those quarantine guidelines are still in effect. However, if the board chooses to move away from our current operating procedures, that could change. If we move away from a hybrid schedule where we can no longer guarantee that we have social distancing, we could potentially see a rise in quarantine if a positive case is reported in one of those classrooms, because we would no longer be able to ensure and one of the alternate options be put in place. So we would be returning to all students in all grade levels being quarantined for 14 days.
Sandy, I have a question. I understand that the vaccinations were a little bit hard to come by at some point in time. I'm looking at the 8 teachers that were quarantined, and are we letting teachers into the schools that have not been vaccinated? Or what's our...
Yes, sir.
Okay. And because of that, they're likely, if, again, under the protocol, that if somebody comes up positive for COVID in the class and they can't provide the social distancing aspect, they're going to be quarantined. Right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I'm just going to give you the latest, and this is as of this moment, the number of staff and students that are excluded because of exposure or having a positive test result. Again, I'm pleased that there are lots of zeros across the chart. But currently right now, we have 0 positive cases being reported, for which staff members are being excluded currently. We have 4 students that have tested positive, 2 of which happened last night. And I think it's interesting to note that many of these are family related. So, you know, it's apparent that it's contagious, and if you're living within the house with someone that's positive, that there's a likelihood that everyone in the family could potentially test positive. So in terms of just being quarantined, though, numbers of staff members that have been quarantined at this point are 5, and we have 99 students that will be quarantined most likely for up to 14 days. Some of those will peel off because they're already midway through their quarantines. And then a total quarantine is 104. So that's the number of individual staff and students that are currently excluded from attending school.
Okay, next we're going to shift to proposed model shifts. So under all options, DCS virtual learning stays in place. So if we move to option 1 is keeping the current operational instructional plan in place with adding 612 students who have IEPs, 504 plans, ESL plans, or ELL plans for those that want to come back 4 days a week. So the current model is PreK5 is on a 4-day hybrid plan A, and 612 is on a 2-day face-to-face hybrid plan, which is still considered Plan B. So students 612 are coming in 2 cohorts, Monday and Tuesday, a second cohort Wednesday and Thursday, and Friday is asynchronous for everyone. In this model, the board does have to, in one of the 3 options, the board does have to adopt an instructional plan that does include students who have registered who have IEPs, 504 plans, ESL, ELL plans, okay? So as we've done throughout the pandemic and presenting options for the board to consider, we've created a brief summary chart of opportunities, challenges, and needs under each of the 3 options. So under option 1, our opportunities maintains continuity for teachers, students, and families, and is so that the public knows the board has had access to all the responses from parents and staff members, many who have stated in the narrative part of our survey that they have strong need for continuity. So this is an opportunity under this current model. It maintains social distancing in grades 6 through 12, the 6-foot social distancing. So even though we would add 170 students, 612, when we spread those students out across our middle and high schools, we can still maintain 6-foot social distancing. So we would remain under Plan B. It gives grades 6 through 12 students with IEPs, 504 plans, ESL, ELL, with a 4-day-a-week option for those parents and students that prefer that. And Fridays being the asynchronous off-site for students allows for teacher planning, which is very difficult to maintain with the contact 3 level restrictions that we put in place since March 1st. Our challenges, the child care hardships for parents and guardians continues on Fridays. Pre-K5 and 6-12 students are on the same schedule. And this does present challenges when we get to testing. So with 6th through 12th grade students who would be in a hybrid schedule, we're going to have to expand our testing window. So all 10 days that are available to testing at the end of the school year, we would have to test students. Students do have to take the EOG tests, EOC tests in our buildings, and it means that we would have probably expanded the test window from what might be 3 to 5 days to 8 to 10. Mr. Tauber has a question.
I do have a question. What are the numbers of students in the 6 through 12 category?
The number of students who are in the 6 through 12 category?
Correct.
We have about 1,800 or so district-wide.
Okay. And the second question I have is, of those 1,800, how many are in school at the present time?
Of the 1,800 students in our high
12.
schools, I was referring to our high schools. So you want
I want 6
the
through
number of
12.
students middle school, 612 total?
Yeah.
Okay. So our high schools is about 1,800, and our middle schools would be 1,400 or so, so maybe about 3,200
3,200?
Students total.
Okay. And of that 3,200, how many are in school at this time? Do you know?
Johanna, did you have something to add? You have the exact numbers? Okay, come on up. Her mic's not on. Thank you.
For 612 students currently enrolled, we have 2,875 students across the district. Enrollment total. So that's not breaking out virtual or face-to-face. That's just total students. And then elementary, just for kicks, is 2,301.
Well, the question I was asking was specifically how many virtual versus back in school for 6 through 12, if you know.
I can look it up.
I believe it's 900,
I think that's the number.
612 who are currently virtual.
Okay.
900.
Thank
That
you.
number changes daily,
Okay.
as does our daily membership. 2 strikes for Dr. Farley for this in total 612 ADM. It's not something I monitor on a daily basis.
So there are about 2,000 6 through 12 attending school, somewhere in that.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I was a math major in 3rd grade.
Well, in 3rd grade? Yeah.
3rd grade.
Any other questions or comments on option 1? Option 2 is for us to shift to pre-K 12, going 4 days a week. So all schools will be going 4 days a week in a hybrid, with Fridays being asynchronous. So our opportunities under option 2, it maintains continuity for pre-K5 teachers, students, and families, because they've been going 4 days a week. Gives all 612 students more face-to-face time. All students pre-K12 are on the same schedule. Friday being asynchronous off-site for students allows for teacher planning under contact level 3 protocols. And there's some flexibility with staffing on Fridays if there is a spike in cases. The challenge is it disrupts the current schedule for 612 students. Under Plan A, social distancing cannot be guaranteed in classrooms, which creates high risk for staff and student quarantine. So if this option or option 3 is chosen, Dare County Schools cannot guarantee 6-foot social distancing in 612 classrooms. We would have a concern, not only theoretical, but based upon survey feedback that we may have an influx of 612 students who do not want to come back into classrooms where we can't guarantee 6-foot social distancing, and then the numbers in virtual jump. And of course, still the childcare hardship on Fridays for everyone. The needs, we would have to maintain the contact level 3 for staff, all the restrictive measures we put in place. We would, tomorrow, have to create 612 status change forms, and we would give parents about 5 days to next week, next Wednesday on April 7th would be our deadline for parents to say, yes, I want to come back 4 days a week, or no, I want my student to now go virtual. So we have to give parents an option. And then this would create a need for April 12th to become a 612 workday. Now, based upon the legislation that was passed in Senate Bill 220, school districts do have, there is language in that, what was the bill that is now a law, that gives districts a chance to adjust their school calendar because of shifts to Plan A. So in statute, the school board could have the ability to mandate a workday as we make this transition. Now, why do we need the workday? We need the workday because A, we're on spring break, and we can't ask teachers in particular to come back to work during spring break. Certainly our administrators, we're 24/7 and we're always working, even though many of them deservedly need a break, okay? We have to give parents a chance to make a decision. Do I want my student going back into 612 classrooms that are not socially distanced by 6 feet? And we need to allow them the opportunity, if they choose, to go virtual. So that registration process needs to happen before we can specifically go in and start to move classroom spaces around and determine who's going where based on scheduling. So that 612 workday is highly needed. We don't need a K5 workday because they would still have the same instructional plan. So that's a little different for Dare County schools, but our recommendation would be K5 still goes on April 12th, 612 has a workday. And we do have precedent, as you know, based upon weather, when we have to close certain schools and other schools still are in session. Option 3 is for everyone to go 5 days a week. And this would result in 612 schools being moved to Plan A. So opportunities, all students pre-K through 12 are on the same schedule. Challenges, it disrupts the current schedule for all students. Under Plan A, again, social distancing cannot be guaranteed in classrooms. Again, a concern, likely, probably, will be an influx of students who go back and want to go virtual. And then there's potential staffing challenges that come with that. Needs, we would have to adjust the contact levels for more staff and student movement to allow teachers, specifically pre-K5, to have planning time and have planning time daily in their classrooms. So right now, as you know, with the 4-day-a-week model, we can devote a significant amount of time to planning, teachers getting into pods, staying in within their pods, planning on Fridays. They would not have that ability to do it with 5 days a week. And so we would have to back up some of our contact protocols in order to start to massage the schedule in order for teachers to have some level of planning. It certainly won't be what it typically is, but we've got to make an adjustment.
Just a quick question. So if we did the 5-day and with no planning because of being able to keep everybody separated, but we still have teachers that are doing both face-to-face and virtual, which would lead them to be doing double duty.
That is true. One of the
without
greatest...
the planning time.
Yes. So it would be minimal or minimized planning time for pre-K5. In this model, the greatest lift is for middle school teachers.
Yeah.
At the high school, those teachers still have 90-minute planning periods. Right now, middle school teachers are teaching face-to-face. They're teaching synchronously. And then on Fridays, not only are they planning, but many of them are also doing sessions for students on Fridays who are asynchronous. So the heaviest lift really in all these scenarios, everyone has challenges. Middle school in particular, this is extremely challenging. And while we're talking about planning time, I'd just like to have Johanna come up just to add a little bit more perspective from a teacher's vantage point about the need for the Friday planning.
So with teacher planning, right now, teachers are really doing a really different job than a job they've ever done before, as all of you know. So having that asynchronous planning now, some in the survey data that I'll talk about in a little bit, teachers have noticed during that 4-day time, the students aren't moving throughout the building. In elementary, that's what I'm talking about on Plan A right now. They don't move throughout the building as much. Do they go outside for recess? Do they go to PE? Yes. But they're not moving. So all that transitional time, they're making up for with instructional time in classrooms. So, and the students are in their home-based classroom the whole day. They're not rotating to the art room, music room. They're in that one room all day. So the teachers can't prep materials and be ready and do what they would normally do during a traditional planning time because they're not in their classroom. They have to leave the classroom, they eat, go to the bathroom. They have around 30, some have 45 minutes. It's not what traditional planning would be. So right now, the Friday, the asynchronous day is really packed for teachers. They are doing professional development on Fridays. They are meeting with their PLCs because they can't meet together, they can't congregate, and then getting everybody on a Google Meet for 30 minutes on a Tuesday, how productive is that gonna be? So they are using their Friday time and doing those IEP meetings with special education teachers, all those things they would usually do during a longer planning block, it's all getting done on Friday, which those days are packed. It's not an off day. The teachers are rolling, administrators are rolling the entire day on Friday. And that's how it's been since we opened the first week of March.
So back to our needs in option 3, we would have to make the adjustments again with the contact level protocols. We would also, like option number 2, have to have a 612 status change process. So again, that would start tomorrow and go through next Wednesday. And then we would ask for, because there's pre-K-12 impacts, a workday on the 12th for everyone. So the difference from a workday perspective in 2 to 3 is 612 in just option 2, and then everyone in option number 3.
John, just to be clear, if we were to go 5 days a week on the elementary level, those classes would still stay somewhat sequestered and they won't go to the media center or music. It'll still stay the same, so that really negates any kind of planning time for the teacher whatsoever in the 5 days that they're there.
Sure. So Johanna and our Director of Elementary Education, Kelly Flora, have worked extensively in getting input from teachers and administrators on the adjustment on contact protocols. So Johanna, do you want to speak to that, please?
Yes, so it could work a couple different ways. So we have 5 different elementary schools with 5 different contexts and different staffs, different everything. So around that, to try to keep it as potted out as possible, because those quarantine numbers that Ms. Kinzel presented earlier, they're that low because of the low contact. That's why they are that low. So we could extend the amount of time that the teacher has coverage by their pod partner, the person that it covers their room. We could extend that amount of time. We could have them start to move, but then that opens up a lot of issues around contact and quarantining, and that would really change the model that's been working really well. So that's not something we're super interested in doing. So we would extend the time, but they still wouldn't be able to plan in their classroom because the kids would be in there. Does that make sense? So they'd get more time, but it really wouldn't be the high-quality planning that they're getting on Fridays. And the teachers, even on Fridays, they're blocking off now, like, I'm going to do my plans from this time to this time, because they get throughout that day, you've got an IEP meeting from 1 to 2, you've got a staff meeting from 8 to 9, you've got anything that happened during a traditional school week of the past happens on Friday. So then all the time the kids are in front of teachers, it's all fully instructional, if that makes sense. And I was talking to one of the principals this morning, and he was sharing that a teacher came to him and said, I've never been able to do 2 rounds of literacy block. Like, I've never been able to do as much during literacy as I'm able to do now, because the transitions aren't there, and those take time.
Joanna, let's think about option 2 and 3 at the secondary level. Who's going to be monitoring the hallways as those students leave from class to class, making sure they're 6 foot apart and they're not using the restroom more than what the capacity allows?
So that's a team effort. So classroom teachers, administrators, custodians, any staff member. So if you go into a restroom in any of our schools, you'll be able to go in. We've got certain access points blocked or taped off. And then in classroom, we've done well with our training components. And so, the bigger concern is not necessarily traffic in the 612 settings. It will increase, again, depending upon students who've registered. It's actually easier to control traffic in hallways to a certain extent, particularly if we've broken down and we're not moving all at the same time. So different schools kind of have different procedures. But what is very challenging is inside the classroom. So it's actually kind of opposite effect. And so when there's potential for 612 classrooms to go from 10 to 18 to 20 students. And there's no way that we could have 6 foot social distancing. Depending upon how many students do come back, it could be a traffic issue, but our greatest concern is high numbers of kids who could be in classrooms who have been socially distanced, and now we cannot do that. If we get above 12 students or so, that's been our mark, then we really struggle with any kind of consistent 6 foot social distancing, period. Okay, so next we're going to move to our survey overview. So as we've done through in many of our special call meetings over the last year, and a lot of things that we do just in general, really since our administration has taken over, is we're greatly value feedback from parents and teachers and staff members. And so we sent out 3 surveys in the last 10 to 14 days. We've surveyed PreK5 parents to get their feedback on the possibility of keeping the current instructional program versus the 5-day option. We have surveyed 612 parents to get their feedback and presented summaries of these options that are before the board today. And then we have surveyed all of our staff. And one of the, so Johanna's going to go through the survey results, and then Johanna has a survey summary of the comments. And with the board having access, as I mentioned earlier in the meeting, when we send surveys out, we do read them, okay? 6 or 7 of our leaders track day by day. When we send surveys out, typically we do about a 5 to 7 day window on surveys because it adds perspective and it adds voice. And sometimes, and you'll see numbers, particularly in measures where we have from 1 to 5, from disagree to strongly agree. And when you have kind of, there's a balance of responses, you don't always know the story behind those numbers. And so in any survey that we've sent out, period, since I've been superintendent, we always ask for what else would you like the planning team to know? And when you get those narrative responses, which the board has had access to, it gives you a different perspective. And we certainly saw that in everyone giving us strong opinions, both for coming back and increasing the number of students face-to-face, and then certainly to the opposite end, to keep things intact. And you clearly saw that as you read through those responses. So Johanna's going to go through our summary. Once we complete the survey process and walk through that, then we'll turn it over to the board for questions and discussion. Johanna?
All right, thank you, Dr. Farley. With our staff survey, we sent a staff survey and then a PreK5 parent survey and then a separate 612 parent survey because they're two different models, you know, very different questions this time around. With the staff, we had 517 responses out of 817 staff members. That's a 63% completion rate. Our last survey was 62%, so pretty around the same ballpark every time, which is great, great sample size. For parents and guardians, total responses across both surveys, PreK5 and 612, was 1,528. Elementaries right around 590, and the total students are 2,300 students in elementary school right now. About 320 of those are in virtual. With the elementary survey, those results were family-based, so the actual count of kids would be higher than that because we had them take one survey per family because no one loves taking the same survey for multiple kids in the same family. In secondary, though, we did it a little different because a middle school student and a high school student might need two very different things, so we did have them fill it out based on per student. So those surveys, it was 946 total responses with around 2,800 secondary students. Total students enrolled were at 5,176 as of 3:30. And then in February, responses were around 1,700, really, we're hitting our mark really across the board. Whoop. All right, so in the staff survey, it was majority certified staff that filled it out, and that's who's in the district in general. So 392 certified, 125 classified. Top responders are teachers, TAs, administrators, and school counselors. So model preferences, we did ask the staff. We gave them each model, option 1, 2, and 3, and then asked which plan they think DCS should operate on for the remainder of this school year. This is all pre-K-12 instructional staff, so those are teachers, TAs, anyone that's a part of the instructional program. Those are just those staff members' responses in this graph. So we are at almost 53% for option 1, 42 for option 2, and then almost at 5% for option 3 across the board. Then this is just pre-K-5. So these are just pre-K-5 instructional staff members because they are already on Plan A right now. So option 1, maintain at 42. Option 2 is at 54. Those for our pre-K-5 staff members, it's really the same option for them either way. So because they would stay on the same model, 4 days a week face-to-face. And then 3.5% to go 5 days a week. Then 612, so this is where a shift could occur. This is option 1 at 65%, option 2 at almost 30%, and option 3 at right around 6, I think that says. Here, I'm going to show narrative responses in a little while. Consistency, that's really what we saw across the board, and I think that's a big reason why we have a lot on option 1 for 612. All right, with the scale for maintaining instructional continuity. So the first one is that maintaining instructional continuity is important to me. So that would mean as few changes as possible this year. That's what that means. 80% of the staff, a little more than that, strongly agrees with that. Then the statement having an asynchronous planning day for plannings and meetings is important to me. That is very similar, right at 83%, really high. Interesting thing here, and we did this same survey, or same question back in February. We asked the same thing, and it was at about 53%. And so now it's 83%. So now that people have had that time, I think it has been incredibly helpful, and to see how our teachers have used it and really maximized that time to give kids 4 days a week everything that maximize their instructional time 4 days a week. Then social distancing. So here's where we start to get all over the map. So maintaining social distancing in the school setting is important to me. We're at about 45% that strongly agree. So if we add together the 4 and 5, we're right around 60. So it still is important, but we are kind of all over with that. Then with, I believe face-to-face students should attend on-site up to 5 days a week. We are at almost half the staff strongly disagreeing with that. So different, all over the place. So some narrative response summaries. So by going through the narrative responses that you all received, just taking those, doing searches, reading all of them, everybody, staff that's listening, parents, families, reread it all. Reading all of them, these were some main points that came across. That consistency is important, especially with the many schedule changes this year. Shifting the instructional program is disruptive to students and teachers and decreases instructional time, because every time there's a transition, there's something we have to change, and that takes time. Teaching face-to-face 5 days a week is preferred, but would require adjusting the contact levels, which puts more students and staff at risk of quarantine. That came up many times, staff writing that they would love to do 5 days a week if we could have school like normal. They would love to do that. Then if contact level 3 remains in place, the Friday asynchronous day is vital to staff to plan and deliver quality instruction. Secondary staff concerned about high numbers of students switching to virtual if instruction is 5 days face-to-face. Because of summer employment, students have enjoyed a lot of schedule flexibility, and with the season starting, there's many staff that wrote about that. And then time flexibility, and then with the hybrid schedule, they have already probably scheduled what they're going to do, and if we make a change, that can be hard on them. All right, parents and guardians. So this is just 612. Light orange is 612, dark orange is elementary. My child is currently enrolled in face-to-face is 73% of the people who responded, and then about 30% are virtual. So choose a statement that best describes your choice if DCS were to move to Plan A in grades 6 through 12. We're at 59% would be interested in their child attending up to 5 days a week, and then being unsure, we're at about 18%. So people that are just going to wait and see what the decision is and then make a choice, they really don't know. And then about 22% will have their child remain in virtual or switch. So we worded it that way on purpose because we were curious if we did do up to 5 days a week, would you want to change? So this is that number. So the red are 30, there's 28 people that say they would definitely switch to virtual if we went to Plan A. Then 144 people say they are unsure. So really what was decided, I think will sway people either way, but there are a lot of people that are unsure, and that's almost 200 kids right there. Then parent survey around social distancing. Once again, we're all over. About half are very concerned about it and half are not as concerned. So we're just kind of spread out all over the place. Then PreK5 parent guardian survey. So this one was much shorter. It was really just saying, would you send your child up to 5 days a week? Would you want to switch to 5 days? 53% of parents said that they would want their child to be switched to 5 days face-to-face. And then almost 44% would want to continue with the current schedule. So that's quite the split. Then the yellow are people that are currently enrolled in virtual. So they want to continue with virtual the rest of the year. Then this was the same question on both surveys, so just so you can see a comparison of the two. I want my child to be on site in the school building for as many days as possible. So in 612 and in PreK5, there is a lot of energy on wanting students to be in the building for as many days as possible. In PreK5, we're right at 52%, about half strongly agree with that. They want their students in the building as many days as possible. Interesting. And then in 612, it's the same. It's exactly 50% strongly agree. So we're really got a lot of different information from across the board. Then narrative responses from 612 parents only. So the same consistency that was really loud and clear. You're going to see it in the PreK5 one too, also maintaining consistency. Concerns about an increase in quarantines under Plan A and students missing sports and school events, prom, graduation, et cetera. Social, emotional, and academic concerns for students who struggle on remote learning days with the hybrid schedule. That was in there many times. Concerns with moving 5 days face-to-face when students have had the 2-day face-to-face flexible schedule on hybrid. Then adjusting 612 face-to-face instructional programs to match PreK5. So there was energy around, let's all have the same schedule. Then maintaining the current hybrid schedule and returning face-to-face 5 days a week for next school year, the 2021-2022 school year. That was in there quite a bit too, that you probably noticed. And then PreK5, similar consistency to maintain and go back 5 days a week next year. This was also in there quite a bit. They chose 5 days a week in the survey, but if teachers will not have planning, they want it to stay 4 days. And thought that was pretty awesome. That was in there quite a bit. They've enjoyed the flexibility of having Fridays as an asynchronous learning day. Would like to see all students pre-K-12 on the same schedule, so whatever's chosen for everybody to be on the same schedule. If 5 days a week is considered, then having less restrictions on student movement in school should be more like it was pre-COVID. That was also a theme that was in there quite a bit. Then this breakdown shows students in secondary 612 that have IEP Section 504 or ESL plans that opted in to come back no matter what, and under Senate Bill 220 that has to happen. So the total possible students is 455, and then 170 opted in by the deadline, and then over time there's been more students that have opted in, and that's at now 217. First Flight Middle it's the largest school, so they'd have the largest number, makes sense. 73, and then 62 at Manio Middle, 28 at First Flight High, 25 at Manio High, and 7 at Cape Hatteras Secondary. Then grade levels. So this is same information, just shows you the grade level breakdown. It's majority middle school students that would want to come back 4 days a week if they have an IEP, Section 504, or ESL plan. Sixth grade, 49, seventh grade, 52, eighth grade, 38. High school numbers get significantly lower. Ninth graders, 18, 13, 20, and then 5 seniors. So the numbers are a lot lower in high school. Thank you.
Ms. Parker?
Yep.
You had a graph on there that showed a survey for 6 through 12. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed like a large number of parents were requesting that their children return back to school.
For which one?
I was
Yes, so 60%.
60%. Now, I mean, doesn't that seem to indicate that if we give them that option as opposed to going virtual, they're actually going to come back into the school? I mean, isn't that reflective of that particular survey graph?
Yes.
Okay, that's all. That's all the question I had.
I have a question. So in the 612, they've been doing 2 days with the cohorts. If they go back to 4 days, what does that look like as far as their how does that work for the teachers as far as they were doing they were online 2 days with half the kids and they were face-to-face half the kids. How does that change? Does that make sense? How does that change for them?
So on the hybrid schedule, the teachers in front of them, they have face-to-face students that come, cohort A, cohort B, and then the cohort A students, cohort B is synchronous, so they're coming in through a Google Meet link, coming into the classroom and are live with the teacher at the same time. And then that's just flip-flopped on the opposite day. Does that make sense? So you're asking if it was 4 days a week, what that would look like?
If they went back to 4 days a week, what would that look like?
So it would be, instead of the 2 groups face-to-face, they become 1 group. Does that make sense? So they become 1 group 4 days a week, and then any students that are virtual would still come into the room. Because right now, the students that are virtual in secondary are coming in with whatever cohort is on remote, is at home. Does that make sense? So they're coming in at the same time. But meeting, if that number is really high, let's say, or virtual students, if that number goes up and is really high, it's hard to meet individual needs of students that when there's many coming in on your computer screen all at the same time. So having the Friday asynchronous day so that they can meet with smaller groups of kids, that's what Dr. Farley was talking about earlier. That's what they're doing if they have large numbers of virtual students. Does that make sense? So it's
Yes.
2 groups, they just were combining them.
So does it make it easier for them to be, is it easier to be on 4 days, or I'm just trying to understand, like, so they're all teaching the same thing each day.
Mm-hmm.
Half the kids are at home, half the kids are in the classroom.
It does take a prep out of there. So
So
is
there's
that what
not
you
as
mean?
much preparation for them to have to do to be able to,
Potentially.
because you'd only have the virtual ones piping in.
Well, they still would have the virtual students
Right,
piping
they would,
in,
but
yes.
they would still have that.
Yes,
Right,
but they
okay.
would prep for the face-to-face students in front of them and then the virtual students daily.
Okay.
So, open discussion and questions. Let me just point out that if the board were to shift the 612 instructional program to Plan A, and we talked about the requirements to DHSS, or excuse me, Department of Health and Human Services, easier for me to say for some reason rather than the 97 acronyms I deal with, in the Duke Collaborative, okay? There is a possible scenario. So if the board chose Plan A 612, option 2 or 3, there is a scenario if there were enough parents who opted out and want virtual that we could possibly, in some classrooms or possibly even some schools, i.e. head or secondary, which is a smaller school, still maintain 6-foot social distancing. So the number of families who opt back to virtual will, in essence, dictate our ability to socially distance if Plan A is an option that the board wants to pursue.
But if they go from where they are now to virtual, they keep their same teacher?
612, if a 612 family decides that they want to have their student go virtual, then yes, they keep the same teacher, and then we're in the mode of instructional delivery that Johanna highlighted.
And Sandy, how many subs do
Can you all
currently
hear
have?
me?
Yes, Ms.
Yeah, go ahead,
Bothwell.
Susan.
I can't hear too many. I got a good, Joanna was excellent. I could hear her perfectly, but John, I totally missed what you were just saying. Can you repeat that?
Sure, so
Maybe I can hear it.
Sure. So there's a scenario if the board chooses option 2 or 3, and 612 goes to Plan A. It's possible if there were, it's hard to predict. It's possible if there were enough students who opted back to virtual because they don't want to come in to settings 4 days a week where we're not socially distanced conceptually. If those virtual numbers are high, then it's possible that we're still operating under Plan B. Not likely, but possibly, depending upon how many opt to go virtual. The other thing that just, is that clear, Susan? Mm-hmm. Great. The other scenarios that we will be dealing with, there's multiple, but one of the things we also have to be prepared for is if 612 is Plan A in either option. Currently, the state mandates, basically at any time, parents can go virtual. So if we have quarantine cases that are rising as we move through time, conceptually, parents could opt to go virtual almost at any time, which is problematic on many levels, from instructional delivery to the timing of that. And so I offer that to say we problem solve and we try to look ahead to challenges, and We can't say there's a hard deadline on entering back into virtual because it doesn't allow for it in the state guidelines currently. If we
Right.
were running our own virtual program, certainly outside of the pandemic, then you could have those conditions on that particular program. So that's wide open. So it is possible as we move through time that we see this back and forth that continues through June 10th. Mr. Hester.
Yes, Dr. Farley, listen to
Just-
that last conversation. That also puts us back in the situation where if the numbers do start to sway more towards virtual, that we can end up having another special session to regroup.
Yeah, I can't
and
hear Frank.
recalibrate.
Well, the one thing I would counsel is I don't think we need any more change, okay, after today. I do not think that we should be in a position, it's loud and clear from staff and parents. You saw the responses. Families want consistency. So I would say after today's decision, I would highly recommend, outside of some exploding situation where we may have to close a school, that the school board not to come back and then make some other adjustment. We've had too many adjustments, and there's reasons for those. But after today, everyone needs us to have consistency going through June 10th from today on. So that would be the one strong recommendation I would make, is not to come back to the table again unless there's some kind of a situation that warrants, closure of a school.
John, if I will, if the numbers do increase for quarantine, they still can do virtual because they're quarantined, correct?
Yes,
that
so
would show-
anytime,
They're
anytime a
not
student
missing-
is quarantined, we do offer them the virtual option while they're out for that period of time.
Sandy, how many subs do we currently have? Because I've noticed on the hiring checklist, there's been more coming through.
Yes, we've been steady adding substitutes, which has been a blessing at this point in time, because we were at a shortage.
Right.
Based on the polls that we had done with our staff, or the substitutes, asking them if they were willing to come back, again, more and more are returning. So in hard numbers, we have about 175 subs on the roster right now that are willing to come to work. Probably about 20 of those have some conditions that are typical, whether they want to come to a certain school, certain grade span, certain days, those types of things. But again, that's kind of normal. So we are
Andy, I can't hear
returning
you.
a little bit more to normal with our substitute pool.
My concern is the middle schools. I think a lot of the high school kids will probably opt to be virtual, especially juniors and seniors at this point. Are the middle schools numbers, are they high enough? I just can see that they have, I'm thinking of First Light Middle School, they've got a lot of students there, and if they're all there, how are they going to distance? They're not going to be able to distance, changing classes and everything.
It is a significant challenge in both Manual Middle School and First Flight
Right,
Middle
yeah.
School to socially distance. I mean, you saw the chart with the number of students who want to return who have one of those four plans. Those numbers are higher. First Flight Middle School is also our highest, has our highest enrollment. So by far, the challenges are greater at the middle school. And then the other part of that is we offer 115 high school courses. So we have dual enrollment courses. So the challenges at both Manual Middle and First Flight are much greater than any other school we have, 612, for spacing.
Does anybody else have any questions? Does anybody want to make a motion? Your mic's not on.
You.
You're welcome.
Madam Chair, I move that the Dare County Schools, is that a signal?
Yeah.
Madam Chair, I move that the Dare County Schools operate under option 2 for the remainder of the 2020-2021 school year.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor by Mr. Tauber for option 2, which is pre-K through 12 Plan A, 4 days a week, face-to-face with a virtual option. Do we have a second?
I second.
Second from Mr. Woody. Any discussion? Susan, did you want to add anything? Did you have any discussion?
Yeah, this is really a tough decision. We're never going to please everyone, even some of the time. And I think we have to go with how the teachers, you know, they need that Friday. And I think that's really important. I so wish that we could have also had a survey for the kids, since they're the ones that are most affected by all of this. But I agree with the motion. I just think we'll get feedback no matter what.
I'd also like to say that, you know, with all these three options, there are hardships
For everybody.
to go around.
Yeah.
I mean, and we're looking at the hardships.
I can't hear you at all, Joe.
I'm sorry. We're looking at the hardships for everybody, and we're trying to make the best possible decision that we can, considering all those hardships. And the hardships for the students, the hardships for the parents, and the hardships for the teachers. And I think option 2 is a good solution, quite frankly. And it's a good transition. It's a good transition to what might occur, hopefully, in the fall.
That's the whole goal. I'm hoping that we can get everybody face-to-face 5 days a week starting next year. I mean, to me, that's a really important thing to reach for.
And I want to thank Dr. Farley and his staff for putting together the information that they put together to show us the most comprehensive picture of what each of these scenarios look like and how teachers and parents feel about that. It is a very difficult decision because it's not going to please everybody, but there's options. So that's the good news. So we have a motion by Mr. Tauber, a second by Mr. Woody. Any further discussion?
I would like to say, with all due respect, I will not be voting for this. The teachers overwhelmingly asked that we don't change anything, and my concern is having all the kids together without social distancing, that we are going to increase closure. We're going to have kids going out for 14 days because there's going to be an increase in COVID exposure. So we only have 7 weeks left. If we were at the beginning of the year, I would be all for this, but we only have 7 weeks left in school, so that's my vote.
I also have to say that the data shows, and I appreciate Joanne Parker and Dr. Farley and his staff, of reading all the information that is given to our staff. But, you know, the data show that the majority does want an option 2. So I'm going to have to go with option 2 as well.
So we have a motion by Mr. Tauber, a second by Mr. Woody. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Nay.
Any opposed?
Yes.
Motion carries 6-1. Okay. With that, we'll take a motion to adjourn.
Madam Chair, I move that we adjourn.
Motion by Mr. Twitty,
Second.
second by Ms. Lawler. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for tuning in, and
Thanks, guys. I wish I could have been there.
feel better soon.
I
Motion-
will.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Aye.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to call the meeting of the Board of Education Budget Workshop to order. The date is April 1st, 2021. We are at First Flight Middle School. It is 2:02. All of the board members are present. We have Susan Bothwell on the phone, I believe. So you have an agenda in front of you.
Madam Chair, I approve. Make a motion to approve the agenda.
There's a motion on the floor to approve the agenda by Mr. Twitty.
Second?
Second from Mr. Hester. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. We have an agenda. First item is the only item is presentation of the Dare County Schools proposed budget for the 2021-2022 school year. Dr. Farley?
Thank you, Madam Chair, board members. Good afternoon. Before we start, I would like to recognize Georgia Sellers, who's my fantastic administrative assistant. Today's her birthday. Happy birthday, Georgia. So, Dare County Schools for several years has held a budget workshop prior to the approval of the formal budget for the upcoming school year. The fiscal year in the state of North Carolina runs from July 1 to June 30th. And we are on a timeline where the board gets the draft budget today in the workshop. We're going to go through all the different details. Ms. Candy Tilley, who is our outstanding finance director, and I will kind of facilitate the meeting presentation here today. The board has, by statute, 30 days to adopt the budget after initially receiving it. So we'll ask the board at our May meeting to approve the budget. Part of the presentation today will be also be made by Russ Gerganis, who's our Director of Facilities, and Russ will be presenting the 5-year CIP plan and approval for this year's CIP projects. And the board, we can have that approved prior to the approval of the full budget. So the CIP plan will come to the board for formal approval on April 13th. So as a quick overview, before Candy provides the board with a short presentation and then followed by going step by step through the proposed budget for the upcoming school year. So the Department of Public Instruction, for as long as I've been in North Carolina, which is about 24 years, comes up with a formula to project student enrollment. So in the state of North Carolina, funding statewide is allotted to schools based upon the number of kids who are in your district. And their formula is kind of a little bit of a secret magical guessing game of how they land on projections, but I know they study enrollment trends, and I'm sure census data and so on and so forth. In the current year, or for next year, starting July 1 for 21-22, the Department of Public Instruction is projecting in ADM, or average daily membership, number of kids who attend the school system, at 5,320. Now, Dare County Schools is historically, in the last 10 years, the ADM's been about 5,100 or so, and that number is very high. And our current projection is about 5,049. And so how that's meaningful for this process is if we plan going into the next school year on the 5,300 mark for the dollars that come with all those students. And if we start school year, the Department of Public Instruction looks at the first 2 months of your enrollment. And if that number is less than their formula, so if their 5,300 and our current 5,049 are the same, our enrollment's the same come the end of October, then we have to give money back, because we, in that allotment, they are attributing a lot more students who, based on their formula, who may not be here. So I say all that to say it's a little bit of a conundrum, but it's very smart for us to plan internally, particularly as it relates to positions, and 80% of the public school budget is in positions, to plan on current enrollment. And if we do that, anything above that number come October is more dollars that come into the county. So that's just smart, conservative planning, and that's something that we do on an annual basis. North Carolina is also one of the about 5 or 6 states, I believe, that have this allotment system, which Candy will explain, where they allot dollars to certain positions in your district. That is a model that has been in place for several years. And again, there aren't too many states across the country that actually follow that model currently. We have a formula in our partnership with the county commissioners in Dare County. So we call it the funding formula. And we are very fortunate because the public school budget in Dare County is typically about 31 to 33% local, which is really unheard of across the state. The rest of our funding, as Candy will go through, is state and federal. And so the funding formula supports over 200 positions that are paid locally. And so our agreement with the county commissioners is salaries, although salaries don't always go up in the state of North Carolina, health and benefit costs continue to rise. And so in the upcoming year, we have a projection of a need for $660,000 or thereabouts local to support all those locally paid positions. And so we're guaranteed, and working with the commissioners, again, very fortunate that they will provide us with those increases. We do get, public schools in North Carolina do get funding from fines and forfeitures, and that continues to decrease, just as a point of consideration. Current federal funding projections look to be about level, or maybe even a little bit more. We do not know currently if there's going to be an increase in salaries. So the governor has presented a budget, the General Assembly will work through the next several months, and we may not know, historically a budget, well, there's been years where it hasn't been passed, i.e. the current year. There's also years where the public school budget is passed in July, August, September, October. So we definitively, if there are raises, will not know that. Possibly for several months. So this is a moving budget. The budget is always amended, but it's smart for us to plan for an increase because we can always kind of fall back if it's not there and readjust. But if we have deficits, so if we didn't plan for an increase and there's a 5% increase in salaries across the board, then we've got some problems. So we set out with trying to ballpark, and 3% is a pretty good mark for us. The retirement rate has increased, so that's gone from 21.68 to 22.95, and health insurance costs are up 3.13. These are the minutia details that we deal with in finance world, but they're important to our work because there's always moving targets. So Candy is going to go through a presentation with some more background about our process, which is very thorough. This is not meant to be braggadocious because she's sitting at the table, but I've been in public education over 25 years, and Candy is certainly one of the most effective finance directors in her department as well in the state of North Carolina. So we're very fortunate. She's very diligent. She knows schools, and she knows what works, and she is going to lead us today in a presentation, and then we'll get into the details in the draft proposed budget. So, Candy?
Thank you, Dr. Farley. Board members, Dr. Farley covered a lot that's in my presentation, but we are going to go through that. Just to let you know what our process was to include all of the stakeholders in our schools. Johanna's got the clicker for me. We give targets, looking at projections based on ADM. We give our schools targets of what we think they will receive. Then those schools, the principals meet with their school improvement teams to determine what their requests will be above and beyond those targets, if they have anything special that they need. And of course, there's capital outlay items, any kind of big projects that Russ would need to be involved in, that's included as well. Once we get those budgets back, the superintendent, myself, the instructional leaders, and of course the facilities director, we meet in regards to those requests and see what's a priority based on needs. As always, in any budget cycle, your needs are going to far outweigh what your resources are. We meet, review those requests, and we determine what we feel like we have to include in the current year and what we can push out and wait for. Then I work on projecting revenues, as Dr. Farley mentioned, looking at what our ADM is, because that's what most of our state money is budgeted on, is what our ADM is. And as I mentioned, or as Dr. Farley mentioned, our ADM is down from what DPI. So if you were to go on the DPI website, you would see state revenues to be significantly higher than what you will see in this budget. And that is because we are looking at actual numbers for where we're at today. Next slide, please. The revenue projections, as we mentioned, DPI is projecting the 5320. This is pretty much the topics that Dr. Farley just referenced in his presentation. So if you'll go to the next slide, Joe, we'll talk about the local funding formula. We had a 5-on-5 meeting yesterday, and we did talk about this formula, and I just wanted to highlight it, especially for some of our newer board members. It's broken into 3 sections. The first section is salaries. It's my understanding that when this formula was created, that they guaranteed state increases and any benefit increases. So that section is calculated solely on salary. ADM does not come into play when we look at the increase for the new year. The second section looks at budgeted items that are specific to our number of students, so instructional supplies, technology, copies, things of that nature. And then the third section are more like our fixed costs, utilities, maintenance, transportation. And then after that is all calculated out, there's an adjustment for any funds that we didn't spend last year. So if we didn't spend all of the money that the county gave us last year, then our projected increase for the upcoming year is reduced, as well as it's reduced for any other local funds that we receive from grantors, miscellaneous revenues, facility rental fees, that type of thing. Next slide, please. This is the formula. It's more comprehensive in what I have to calculate to send to Dave Clausen at the county, but this gives you the math of how we came up with the $660,508 that we are anticipating the county would give us based on the funding formula. Next, Joe. As Dr. Farley mentioned, we are very fortunate in Dare County in that we have a significant amount of our revenue comes from our local county. And that's nice in that it doesn't have, the restrictions are not as much as they are in state. State comes in the buckets, and we can only do so much in each bucket, and it's very restrictive as far as how we can spend the money. Local appropriation for us is mainly used for operations. I did want to note, it is a decrease from where we're at today, moving into next year, a 4.2% decrease. I attribute that to COVID funds. As you know, we've received a significant amount of COVID relief funds that were very specific in addressing response to our needs as a result of COVID-19. And the state and federal funds are significantly higher in our current year because of that. Next, please. The projected expenditures we've touched on, we assume 3%, this entire book that we're getting ready to go through assumes a 3% increase for all staff. The retirement rate, that is my projection. We have not heard anything from DPI as far as any projections for retirement and health. They do anticipate them going up. So in my process, I look at a 5-year average of how much it's increased over the last 5 years, and that's how I determine those numbers. Next, please. Just wanted to highlight fund balance. As you know, there's an understanding that we will not hold more than $1 million in our fund balance that is in our local fund. At the end of last year, we had over $1 million in our unassigned fund balance, which is kind of like our savings account. That's what we have. That's our rainy day fund. If something happens and we need to appropriate funds for something, catastrophic that happens, a chiller goes out at a school or something like that, we have funds that we can do that with. That's what this is for. We did appropriate in the current year over $390,000. So it's now back down to under $1 million, and that was, as you recall, there was a budget amendment approved a couple of months ago to write off some debt from the school nutrition fund as well as the after-school program. Next, Joe. Thank you. This is just a quick slide just to show you what the proposed budget is before you today. It's over $67 million. That does incorporate our two enterprise funds, which are school nutrition and after-school enrichment, which are supposed to be self-sustaining. They're run just like a regular business. And then our two capital pots of money that we receive from the county, and then, of course, operating, which includes all of our state, federal, and local appropriated funds. Any questions on the overview? I am going to go page by page in this book. I do want to say that when I was talking to Dr. Farley about preparing for this meeting, I consider this, our state government always talks about an expansion budget. We have a baseline budget, and then we're going to expand out and do all of these new programs. I consider what you have before you today kind of like a business as usual base budget, where there's not any real new big programs being presented. So you're not going to hear a lot. It's going to be a lot about salary increases and benefit increases. When you consider that 80 to 85% of our budget is personnel costs, there's not a lot more room for other expenses to be in there. So, any questions about the general process or where we're at? Okay. If you'll turn to page 3 in your book, that's the very first allotment. You'll hear instructional leaders, myself, Dr. Farley, we will refer to O1 positions. This is that allotment. This allotment is where we get funding for our classroom teachers. This allotment is based on ADM, and we are looking that we may have a loss of approximately 7 teachers if the projection that we are projecting comes through. As you know, we have teachers through attrition, retirement, resignations, moving out of the area, that kind of thing, that we may be able to recoup those positions elsewhere later, but we're a little early in that process. So no one has been cut. There's no one is being laid off at this point or anything, but know that we are looking at that and monitoring resignations as they come in. You'll notice a decrease of 4 positions. Those 4 positions are the positions that we will convert to the dual language immersion program as it progresses to the next grade level. Again, this is all benefit costs associated with classroom teachers. The next page is central office administration. DPI has told us to project for a small increase, 0.2%. And you'll notice that we had a decrease even though there are benefit cost increases. If you'll remember, when our former CTE director left, we absorbed that position with a current member, and so we were able to save funds by absorbing those duties by an existing staff member.
As the board recalls, we've cut over $800,000 from central office in the last 15 months through about 6 positions.
Next, we have non-instructional support. This is where we pay for substitute teachers, our office, clerical staff, maintenance, data managers, various non-instructional support, just as it states in the title of the code. You'll notice that it does not have a huge increase. We've had several veteran employees that have retired or are getting ready to retire at the end of this fiscal year. And of course, when we replace them, they will be replaced with someone at a lower salary. So that is taken into consideration. Next is our school building administration. This is where we get the allotment of months of employment for our principals and our assistant principals. Again, it's all salary and benefits. Next is instructional support. Again, all salary and benefits. This is for our staff members, media coordinators, guidance counselors, psychologists, speech language pathologists we have some speech language and psychologists, some are paid for with EC funds, some are paid for with 07 funds. That's determined based on their salary. '01 allotment, '07 allotment are position allotments. We get so many positions. Those positions, whether you're a beginning teacher making $35,000 or you're a teacher that's been teaching for 40 years and making $65,000, the position is the position. And so we try and put the highest paid individuals in the position allotments and leave the lower paid teachers in our dollar allotments, which is our EC funding. State EC funding is a dollar allotment. So as we talk about positions, I do want to note, when you look at this, you'll see like a 0.8 position, and you're like, how can we have a 0.8 person? Well, we do have some staff members that are not 100% fully employed. They work a 60% week. But also, a position with DPI equals 10 months. A lot of our guidance counselors are 12 months, as well as a lot of our EC support staff, psychologists, and speech language are 11 months. So they then become an 11-month person becomes a 1.1 position. A 12-month person is a 1.2 position. So that's why it's not even numbers. Next is where we pay for any kind of leave payouts for state paid employees. This is a guaranteed allotment. That means regardless of how much money we spend, DPI guarantees that they will pay for it. Now, that being said, local, it has to be built into our budget. So this projection is based on where we're at right now as of the end of February and projecting it for a full year. I will tell you that when I learn of someone that is retiring, not normally retirees, but resigning, and they're paid for with local funds and they may have a payout of any type, we try and move them to state so that we can take advantage of this and have that paid for by the state and not have to pick that up locally. So we do monitor that. Next is our driver's ed program. It's based on the number of ninth graders. We did have a decrease in the ADM by about 30, but if you look at the revenue section, you'll see that the revenues are higher this year than they were for the current year. That is because of COVID. When we got to the point of we realized we weren't going to be going back to school, it was not going to be a traditional year, we knew that students wouldn't be able to partake in driver's ed, so we reduced those fees in half. And so if you see that going up, it's about a double of what we had projected for the current year in local fees. Next is our CTE months of employment. Again, we get months of employment based on ADM in grades 8 through 12. This is regardless of what you make, a month of employment is a month of employment. So whether you make $5,000 a month as a teacher or $3,500 of a month, it comes off as a month. All of our CTE teachers are paid from this allotment. Typically, we receive more months of employment than are necessary for our staff. That helps to fund our programs. We are able to take months of employment and convert them to program dollars, and it's converted at the average salary of our teaching population. And typically, your CTE teachers are higher paid. They have more years on their license because they get to count their time in their trade. So it's not just their teaching experience, it's their experience in their field prior to becoming a teacher. This year, as of February, just to stay consistent, we had converted 10 months of employment to program support. Since that time, because we've had some lapsed salary in the CTE program, we have converted another 30 months in March to program support. Dr. Donlin and his career development coordinators, along with the CTE teachers, have been working together to spend those funds to get items that the programs need to function. The next page is the CTE program support. As I mentioned, this is a direct support of the CTE programs. This is where they buy their supplies, they do workshop, they're able to take field trips. And so when we convert those months of employment, that's where the money goes. So if you look at our current budget and then look at what's being proposed for next year, the reason there's such a huge decrease is because we have converted those 10 months. And next year, we're just looking at what our allotment is based on ADM. We do project to have more than enough months of employment to cover our staff for the CTE program, so we will be looking at converting months of employment once the school year gets going to the program support. The next page, again, is CTE. It is federally funded. This program is specific to expansion programs. It's doing something new, different, growing what we have. It's not doing the same thing we've always done. And so there are some guidelines as far as what purchases can be made from this program. Next is, it says international faculty, but it's our dual immersion. As I mentioned, we will be adding 4 new teachers so as our program progresses to the next grade level. This is basically their salary and benefits. There are fees associated with bringing in the international teachers. As we don't pay for retirement or hospitalization on them, that's all handled with Participate, who we partner with for this program. Next is our disadvantaged student funding. Currently and projected into the next year, we fund a 12-month social worker out of this program as well as a guidance counselor out at one of our schools. There is a slight decrease, and that is, if you'll notice, there was some instructional supply money set aside, and it has not been utilized. And so we didn't budget for that next year, and quite frankly, with some of the federal funds that we're going to receive, we will have some funding to help with any kind of remediation for disadvantaged students or at-risk students as we move forward. Next is the teacher assistant allotment. It is, as it states, for our teacher assistants. And the increase is for salary and benefits. Next is professional development. I've been doing school finance right at 8 years. 9. I've been doing it 9 years, and they have not had professional development money since I've been a part of school finance. So it's been a long time since the state has funded any professional development money specific in its own allotment. But the money that we're proposing for next year is to hopefully have our Ignite conference again next year, which is housed here, when we have an in-district, all-day professional development for all of our teachers.
So, as you know, we had several board members who came to our Ignite conferences. We've gotten about 95% positive feedback from our teachers in the conferences that we put together. And part of our model, we've saved a lot of professional development dollars, but part of our model has been to recognize experts in our school buildings who are presenting to other teachers. So we've gotten a ton of great feedback, and unfortunately with COVID, we've not done it this year, but we're looking forward to implementing the possibility of 2 Ignite conferences next year.
The next page is a behavioral support program. This is a grant funded. It's a grant that Dr. Rita Roberts has to request the funding for our EC population. I do include it even though it's a grant funded because we've been receiving it for several years. This year, currently, we are paying for 2 TAs and a portion of a teacher. In the past, we've paid for portions of 2 teachers, and so I guess that grant is written based on the needs of the behavioral needs students at the time that are enrolled. So I just projected level funding, and when you look at the revenues, you'd say, well, that's not level, that's less. This program can only be used for salary and benefits. You can't, like for teachers, you can't charge substitute pay for this. You cannot charge supplies to this. It is strictly salary and benefits for current employees. And so with the projection for the people that are employed, the only amount that needs to go to local is the amount for the supplement. So that made the reduction for the total cost. That's why the state is a little less than level. It's not needed. I don't know if I confused the matter with that or not, but next is our state EC funding, which I referenced earlier. This is a dollar allotment. It is based on our head count with our EC population. Currently, well, as of December 1, 2020, our head count census went down by about 41 students. Of course, I was concerned about that and reached out to Dr. Roberts, and she is projecting that our April 1 how appropriate that we're meeting today. She is expecting that census to go up by about 35 students. So it will not negatively affect us, hopefully, as we move forward into the next year as far as funding. This pot of money pays for teachers. It pays for ECTAs. It pays for psychologists, speech language pathologists. So all different types of EC personnel. And just so you know how we think about things is that we try and keep staff in the state and federal funds, and that is strategic for workers' comp purposes. If we can keep them in a state fund, that saves us locally. As I mentioned earlier, if they resign or retire, then those types of payout costs are picked up by the state. And so we always try and put as much personnel in state and federal as we can. Next is our AIG population. This does pay for several teachers. Currently, our enrollment is 10.93%, is what our AIG identified population is. We are funded at 4%. That's just the formula that DPI has in place. And also going back to EC, sorry to jump back to you, but our population is at 13.1% of our total ADM, and we're funded at 12.75%. So some of these special populations are funded at a certain percentage level, and in both cases, our populations are higher than what our funding level is. Next is charter schools. We have seen an increase in charter school enrollment this year. It's up by 5 students. I'd like to think that that has something to do with the pandemic, and that people just put their students in the charter because they can have virtual charter schools. And that's where we've seen an increase. The number of students at Water's Edge and Corolla has stayed the same. And we have 17 students at Water's Edge and Corolla. And we have 1 student at NEAT in Elizabeth City, and then there are 24 students between the 2 state virtual charter schools. And that's where we've seen the increase in the charter school enrollment. Now, as you know, part of the charter school law is that they get a portion of our county appropriation, and that includes county appropriation and our fines and forfeitures. So that's why that's budgeted, so that we can show that as an expense coming off of our revenues from the county. Next is the EC federal fund that we receive, and it pays for 30% of a speech language pathologist. Next is our Title I program. It pays for several teachers at our 4 Title I schools, as well as some teacher assistants. We also have parent involvement funds set aside in this allotment, as well as remediation funds. All schools get remediation intervention funds from our at-risk pot of state money, but we supplement those funds with Title I funds for our Title I schools. The next page addresses our ESL population, and we pay for ESL teachers across the district and various supplies and computers, softwares that are needed to assist with those students' learning. Transportation, we are being held harmless this year for transportation as a result of the pandemic. Our transportation state funds are based on a budget efficiency rating, and that's determined by the number of miles, and Mr. Twitty, you could probably speak much more intelligently about that than I can, but we are being held harmless because we have not had buses on the road like we would in a typical school year. So all LEAs across the state are being held harmless, and the $1.1 million that is their estate is the amount of money that DPI has projected for us. The next is another EC federally funded pot of money. It's part of an IDEA grant, and it pays for several teachers. The next is our instructional supply allotment, and it comes from various sources. We lost a significant amount of funding in the current fiscal year. The legislature did not appropriate state technology funds to LEAs this year. They held that money back, and that was about $50,000 to $60,000 for us. So that was a significant decrease to us. Thankfully, we did receive COVID funding that was able to help us in those areas, especially in times of remote learning. You will notice that in this, our repair parts have gone down from where they're at currently. With the devices that we currently have on order, should have all devices in students' hands will be under a warranty. So we're anticipating a drop in the repair parts. This allotment also is where we have the projections that we've given the schools. So we give them so much money. They actually get $55 per ADM for instructional supplies, $30 state, and $25 from local. And that is a significant amount of money in comparison to the rest of the LEAs in our state. And so our schools have the ability to spend those funds as they see fit for their individual needs at the individual schools. There's a lot of autonomy in that to make it work for each school, because each school has various needs.
Candy, are we leasing those computers?
We are not. We are purchasing them outright.
Okay.
When we purchase them outright, they are coming with a 4-year warranty. And it is return it and they fix it. Correct? Yes.
And as
Ashley?
I understand it, you have your top dogs on there negotiating contracts.
We do.
Good.
Yes. We have been very fortunate, and that's why I say it saves us not only in repair costs that we can take a machine and send it back, but in our staff's time that we can say, here, send this back, and they're not having to troubleshoot as much. The next page is our at-risk funding, which I referenced earlier about where we pay for intervention for schools. We did leave that amount in there, which is that's been pretty consistent of what we've been setting aside for schools. We look at the ADM for each school and allot that on an ADM basis. And as I mentioned, Title I does supplement our Title I schools. This pays for this allotment also pays for homebound teachers, a portion of one of our social workers. And we have some MTS and AVID costs built into this as well. Next is our Title II funding, which is a federal appropriation. This does pay for a teacher to help with classroom size, as well as for mentor pay. It's my understanding that several years ago that the state offered mentor pay. That went away, but Dare County Schools sees the value in that program and having veteran teachers be mentors to our beginning teachers 1 and 2, and so we still continue to offer that, and that we use this source of money. The next is Title IV, Student Support and Academic Enrichment. This is used for a well-rounded, there are certain categories, and it's very specific about what you can use it for. Health and safety, a well-rounded education, and then technology. We do use this pot of money, and I keep looking at Sandy because she's our federal programs coordinator, and she makes sure that we have all of those pots separated and we're spending them accordingly. But we do use this as part of the health and safety to pay for one of our social workers or assist with portion of her salary. And then we have used it to assist with some of our ESL and dual language.
Dual language, and then the technology portion of that kind of goes towards the professional development that Dr. Farley mentioned earlier about developing teachers, putting out modules and putting them out together, so that it helps us to be able to provide stipends to them for doing that work.
Thank you, Sandy. Next is our NC PreK program. This is this program. I was asked a question by a colleague the other day about NC PreK teachers. Our state money can only be used for K-12. It cannot be used for pre-K programs. So While you see at the bottom, it says, for revenues, it says state grant. It is a state-funded program, but it is not a state funds that flow through DPI. It comes through the Department of Health and Human Services. And this pays for our teachers and our TAs that are in that program, as well as instructional supplies that they may need.
Candy, I see that $4,000 is in for background checks. Do we have a big turnover every year for that?
No, what happened is they have a special background to work with this program, and anybody that has any contact with an NC pre-K child has to go through that special DHHS background check. It's not our normal.
But it's not a yearly checkup. Once you get the first checkup.
No, it is
background
not.
check,
But if we have a substitute teacher that comes in,
You have to have a background
they
check.
have to have that special background check, and it's like $26 or $27 a person. A bus driver, a substitute bus driver. So you can see how that grows exponentially when you start the number of people that can come in contact with one of our EC pre-K students.
Candy, we have to apply for this grant on a yearly basis? Does it require us to apply
We,
for that?
we get an allotment. We have to tell how we're going to use that money, but it's based on our head count and the number of slots that we have in NC pre-K.
We're an approved site for NC pre-K, and so we're in the system. And annually, you have to make sure that you are keeping up with your end of the bargain, and we do have to submit numbers. So as Candy said, it is a student head count based on their attendance for a 10-day period, so it continues to be based off that.
And there's also a committee that meets every year too, right, Sandy?
I'm sorry?
You also have a committee that meets every year to go over things that everything's being, done right by.
There's monitoring visits, like with all money that's given to you.
So how do you deal with a substitute? I mean, do you have a certain allotted subs you've already pre-screened?
As I mentioned in the earlier meeting, we have a lot of substitutes that have preferences. Our teachers have preferences too for who works really well in that program area. So what we do is to try to be proactive is select who are the pre-K program substitutes that are most likely to be used in those classrooms, and we have them background checked and on file, so we're good to go with that. They also have to have CPR training. I mean, so we have a small group of folks that we rely on heavily to substitute in those classrooms because they have to meet certain requirements.
Yeah, I was going to say, you can't call somebody at 6 in the morning if they're not qualified.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, on a one day, we can get excused if it's a one-day emergency, but if it becomes longer than a day or two, we are required to make sure we have somebody in there with those qualifications.
Thank you.
The next page is general operations. That pays for supplies that are needed at central office, supplies for the board, the insurance that covers the entire district. This is like district level expenses that it takes for us to run the district. There is a significant decrease of all, and that is because of the write-off that I mentioned earlier in regards to the child nutrition program and the after-school program that was budgeted in the current year when we appropriated the fund balance. Next is athletics. We do give our schools, middle and high school, an allotment. I'm looking at what's been given in the past. Quite frankly, I couldn't figure out how it was determined who got what amounts. And so wanted to have equity in the athletic programs, just like we do with instructional supplies, office support, that kind of thing. So we looked at a per sport allotment, and when we did that, Cape Hatteras Secondary was going to lose a significant amount of money. So we held them harmless this year. So you will see that there is an increase in the fees and operations of about $10,000 from where we're at currently. That was to hold Cape Hatteras Secondary harmless for this school year. So they got level funding from what they've had. They will get level funding, moving forward from this year. But then for the 22-23 year, they will have to adhere to the new per sport allotment. And so we gave them a year's notice so that they could prepare for that. Next is utilities. We discussed this a little bit at 5 on 5 yesterday. When we abruptly closed schools last March, Russ immediately jumped into action and like, okay, that's somewhere we can save money. We won't have to, have lights and heat and cooling for the longer periods of time because we don't have people in buildings. You don't have as many individuals using the restroom and flushing the toilets, so your water costs go down and the sewage costs, those kinds of things. So to project for next year, and of course this year we haven't been in school for very long, so I went back to 18-19, which was our last regular school year. So this page looks a little different from the others. It's got the actual cost from 18-19. And I did a projection based on a 3% increase. Russ has reviewed it and feels comfortable with where we would be at moving forward into next year. Next is our maintenance program, which also includes custodial supplies. As you know, we have a new position that we share with DEF. That's a person that requires another uniform, another person that requires another of the safety boots, and so that requires some extra costs. So we did an increase there, as well as we've been having with the increase in hand sanitizers and soaps, people washing their hands more frequently. We gave custodial supplies and uniforms a little bit of a bump there for that. Additionally, we have $35,000 that we had put in the budget this year in capital for engineering fees to be used for when Russ has major projects that he has to consult with an engineer for design fees and stuff like that. And so we need our capital money, and so we've moved that $35,000 into operations and taken it out of the capital budget so that we could use the capital funds for our capital needs. That's it for operations. Are there any questions about what we went through?
I have a couple, Candy. Driver's ed program, it's going to be an increase for the parents to pay, correct? Because currently it's $65 per student that parents pay.
That's correct.
Do we know what the cost will be next year for the parents to pay?
It's the same.
It's going to be the same.
It will be the same, yes. Towards the end of this book is student fees. We're not proposing any new fees. That will be the same, so it'll be $65. So that, sorry, I was trying to get to that page. The $28,405 is based on 65 times the number of ninth graders that we project, which is 437. The reason it was in half this year is because we knew we wouldn't have people participating, and so we had to look at cutting that back.
Okay, because I see the sign out front here, the class is already full.
They are now, and we actually worked with our driver's ed provider to do virtual classes. So the classroom, we had to pay, it was a little bit more cost associated with it, but we could get the classroom portion with our driver's ed provider done virtually so we could get kids, because if not, there was going to be a huge backlog. And they've been driving. They had to have masks, gloves, sanitizing stuff, and so they are driving. So, but that didn't start back until, I want to say, right after the Christmas break. But don't hold me to that.
That's fine.
But
And then I noticed on 007 where we're possibly not looking for any addition for social workers. We're not going to look to add a position.
that we're not looking right now on that. As you know, we received some COVID money called GEARS funding, and we hired an additional social worker with that special pot of money. It is time limited, but we are not looking to use any state or local money at this time to add a new social worker position.
But as we discussed yesterday in the 5-on-5 meeting, we have a significant amount of federal funding that's coming from two ESSER allotments. ESSER is the Elementary and Secondary Schools Emergency Relief Funding, which could be as much over a 3-year span, as much as $9 million. So 20% of that funding, ESSER 2 goes from 2021 to 2023. ESSER 3 goes from 2021 to 2024. 20% of the funding is intended for social emotional programs and the well-being of students. So to David's question with social workers, as far as position goes, we will strongly look at the concept of possibly adding a social worker or two. We've got a lot of work that needs to be done as we analyze. A lot of this is coming quickly, and we still don't have money that has come in yet in those funding sources, but we were going to do an analysis of the different ways that we can spend funding. The main concept is for learning loss. And so we've got different waves of planning that we need to do. The first will be our summer program. So we've been working and we've surveyed parents and staff on the need for summer school enrichment and instructional opportunities for students. We'll be getting that information out shortly. Kelly and Joe have been leading up the K5 work that's being done, Keith 612. And so we intend for our first wave, well, we've already had funding that came in this fall. So about $600,000 of that funding went to technology. The next wave will be the summer programs, so we can pay for that with federal funding. And then we've got a plan over the next 2 to 3 years how we can best impact students. So we'll be spending a lot of time in the next 2 to 3, 4 months talking about those funding sources and planning, and that could have a significant impact on our kids in closing that achievement gap. So, but relative to that point, social emotional learning and needs will surface in our top 5, and so we could expand positions. The trick, and we'll talk more about this, will be once you bring new positions into a district and you are on a limited timeline for funding sources, sustainability becomes a challenge at some point. But we'll talk more about that as we move through the next several months.
Are there any other questions?
This is just how many teacher assistants do we have in the county?
Honestly, I do not know that off the top of my head.
Are they just K and
I'm
one?
only because we just did a refresh on their computers, and I think it was like 115, correct?
Yeah, that's about right.
That's at or about 115.
All right.
But many of those are exceptional children's program assistants.
Oh, okay.
Okay. The next tab in our book is the capital improvement plan. I'm going to turn it over to Russ if he's ready to walk you through the process that we did with the capital improvement plan in conjunction with the CIP committee of this board.
So while Russ is coming up to the microphone, Russ is our Director of Maintenance. He does an outstanding job. And for the community, the Board of Education has about 10 committees. And we have a Capital Improvement Plan Committee that has met and approved the draft that is coming before you today. And Russ has put together a high-quality presentation that highlights the current year's projects and even provides some pictures and a lot of details around needs. So Russ, welcome, and thank you for all your work.
Yeah, thank you, and good afternoon to all the board members, Chair, Dr. Farley. Candy, you've done a wonderful job, and I give her all the credit. I just kind of put it on paper, and she gets all the credit. So, Keith, are you ready to rock and roll? You got everything going? Okay. So what we have here is the proposed 2021-2022 capital improvement plan. So a little history here. It's a short-range plan, usually 4 to 10 years, which identifies capital projects and a timetable for construction and completion. These projects are identified as $50,000 or more. You will see into the next section of the budget book, capital outlay and maintenance receives some of the capital outlay funds. They're really identified for anything over $5,000. So this is projects over $50,000. It provides a systematic evaluation of all the requested projects at one time. So you can look over the next 5 years right here on one piece of paper and see where our funds are going and what school it's going to. It focuses on preserving a government entity's infrastructure while ensuring the efficient use of our public funds. The previous year CIP, which is the current year we're in now, the projected funding was around $1.465 million. We received only $145,000, and that was for the NAGSED cooling tower. The Manual High School roof was $1.2 million. It was also funded this year as well under a different funding project that the county has greatly helped us out with. All other projects requested were not funded. So we're going to go in your budget books, starting with the first line at Kitty Hawk. It is the replacement of the bleachers currently in the gym. They're original to the school. They present a safety issue with the kids that have PE during the day and sport events at the school during the evening. It's noted on the bleacher inspections that we have done every year that they recommend replacement. They're difficult to open and close. So what we propose is kind of the bleachers you see here in First Flight Middle School's gym. It's all new plastic, well-manufactured bleachers. They provide ADA recovery seats. We'll choose a color to match the school, and we'll get the school's input on that. And we'll upgrade from an all-manual to an all-electric operation. So I have provided some pictures here. You can kind of see the current bleachers pushed in, and some safety issues that we've identified there on the picture on the right. So First Flight High School, we are experiencing some siding issues and some paint failure. It was last painted in 2016. We have fasteners that are rusting. If you come in the main door and look to your left, this is actually the picture that I put on the slide here. So what we're going to do is start replacing certain sections that are failing around the school, and we were requesting $50,000 this year. First Flight Middle School and First Flight Elementary School boiler upgrades. So this is original equipment. They were installed when the schools were built in 1990. They're old fuel boilers. We have gaskets that are getting old. Parts are beginning to be obsolete. We have fuel leaks, clogged oil filters, which creates downtime. We lose heat in the schools, and we have to bring maintenance guys out in the evening. We plan to convert it to natural gas. We already have natural gas available at both sites. It runs all the kitchen appliances. So Piedmont will be providing a new meter, and which will supply all the BTU load we need for new boilers. They both have large 10,000-gallon fuel tanks on each site that will eventually need replacement. And estimated cost on replacing those 10,000-gallon tanks in future may be $200,000 per school. So if we can convert to natural gas now, we're going to save several hundred thousands of dollars in the future of having to replace those tanks. So I provided a picture of First Flight Elementary School's boiler on the left. You can kind of see it's old, antiquated, and a fuel tank that is starting to rust fairly quickly on the right-hand side. So that's to give you a kind of visual of what we're dealing with. Manual Elementary School chiller replacement is coming up. We've requested $350,000 to replace this. This single chiller is installed in 2005, so we've gone beyond its life expectancy, which was only 10 to 12 years in this corroded environment. It supplies the two-story newly constructed part of the school, and that's it. So if we lose this one chiller, we lose all air conditioning abilities for that part of the school. You can see in the pictures that we're starting to see some advanced cool corrosion. This will eliminate new parts costs, and a new chiller comes with warranty and will ultimately drive our service contract that we have down. So let's go to K. Patter Secondary School. The library, as you know, that school received a lot of damage, and within the library, we have completely given it a new facelift. The air handler units were not replaced under insurance. They were cleaned, inspected, disinfected, and this is original equipment pre-1988, after the first renovation was done many years ago. The outside air ventilation that comes in has rusted internal parts. They have old control boards, which a new air handler unit will come with new, and the valves are extremely rusted. So you can see the old current unit versus to what a new unit looks like that we recently installed last year at First Flight Middle School. So like I mentioned, the hurricane took a toll on the secondary school. So all the roofs, the shingle roofs were installed when the new part was erected in 2007. And all remaining parts of the secondary school have been replaced under the hurricane. So this highlighted red section is the oldest, and it's the flat roof that we are requesting $80,000 to replace with the same type of roof, which will get us another 25 years. It holds water. It was damaged during the storm, but we were only given insurance money to make the repair, not replace. K. Patterson Elementary School, the exterior paint and siding, we are requesting $200,000. What we do is we paint a school a year. We have schools constructed of hardy plank, PVC trim, which, as you know, everyone lives down here. If you let your house go 15 years, it's time for an upgrade, time to get repainted. So our schools are no different. It was built in 1999. It's only been painted once. And this is more of an aesthetic thing. K. Patterson Elementary School is tucked away in the road that it's on. It's not like K. Patterson Secondary School right on the Sound. So we are asking for this. The projected funding is around $1.4 million. So this is a $200,000 project that we're going in asking. So which brings the total to 1.6. If the county only funds us 1.4, this is the project that we're going to cut. We can wait another year. So transportation has a fuel station right there at the secondary school, and per the fire marshal, he has found it in violation. It's several years old. We have a new quote to replace it, and hopefully that project will get started this summer, and we've budgeted $65,000 for it. And so that's kind of a lifeline for Alex and his transportation units down there. District HVAC controls. We're requesting $60,000. So we mentioned the chiller, and we've also mentioned boilers. If you want to understand what and how they run, it's these fancy little digital displays that you see scattered in our mechanical rooms. So they are the brains of our HVAC program. We have a building control unit at each location. It's aging hardware technology. Software upgrades have already taken. So we've taken our building automation system and gone from an old analog system to a new web-based platform. And now we're going school by school, upgrading our brains to operate on the new system. To give you an idea of what a building control unit looks like on the left, and a pumping control package on the right, or some kind of hardware and controls that we are having to upgrade. To give you an example, and Candy mentioned fund balance, if a chiller goes down, if one of these little control boards goes down, like it did at Manuel Elementary School in August, it costed the district $34,000. So if we can be proactive and put it on a capital plan, hopefully we don't have that failure and that downtime of having to run all of our equipment in a manual format. One of our biggest needs that directly affects our students when they go out on recess is playground equipment. As we mentioned, we're in a harsh environment. Our playground equipment was all installed at the same time, just like our schools were built at the same time. So the preventive maintenance has been done. You may not know this, but we have a licensed playground inspector on our staff who had to go to school for it and get a certification. We go out there and we paint and scrape, and we've done just about all the Band-Aids we can on certain schools. So we're requesting $180,000 that was also requested last year, which was not funded, to start at 2 schools and give, for an example, First Flight Elementary School, $90,000, and Kitty Hawk, $90,000. And then we'll work our way to the other elementary schools within the county over the next 2 years, as you can see in the 5-year CIP. I've provided this picture at First Flight Elementary School because this would be a unit we would replace. Estimated cost on this unit installed is around $85,000. The good thing is, if we can come to the table with $90,000, a lot of big playground companies like Miracle and Game Time will offer matching grants. So if we can capitalize on $90,000 and get a matching grant, we can get a lot more accomplished. So that's kind of the goal. So I'd like to leave you with a quote. The time to replace the roof is when the sun is shining, by John F. Kennedy. So we don't want it raining inside on us. Let's get it done before that happens. Do y'all have any questions? None?
I know, that's shocking that I don't have a question, right, Russ? No, thank you, very good job. Appreciate all the work of the CIP committee, and, and Joe, do you have a question?
I don't have a question, but I would just like to thank you for all the work that you put into this, and it just makes our job a lot easier as a, board to draw conclusions and say yes. Thank you.
Well, I give you all the credit because it takes, I guess, an army and a family to keep the operations going. I'm just one piece of the puzzle. So thank you all for what you do as well.
Thank you, Russ.
I just want to echo your thanks to Russ. It's nice to have a facilities director that understands budgets. He is so helpful. It makes my job easier, especially when it comes to bidding projects. He knows exactly what needs to be done, and it makes my life a lot easier. So anyway, we're having a love fest here. We all thank each other for all we do. So moving on to capital outlay. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we do get the schools to submit any needs that they have for capital outlay. And then we look at and use Russ' expertise as to what is necessary now versus what could be pushed out later. Manio Elementary has requested coil risers for several years now. It's a safety issue, so we have included that in this year's budget. Manio Middle has requested some horseshoe tables. I think that goes to a special style of teaching that they do now, collaborative. I'm not the education person, I'm not sure what it's called, but I know they're looking at doing small groups and that type of thing with horseshoe tables. Dr. Farley is
You did well, Candy.
okay. Manio High, they've requested a gator for several years. We did do a budget workshop with Ms. Bothwell by herself, since she wasn't able to be here today, and she said, "What's a gator?" And I couldn't come up with it, and then later I was like, it's like an ATV, so something that they can use for their athletic program. They've asked for one for several years, and so this year we've included it. First Flight High has a need for some outdoor cafe tables. Right outside here, you can see where they have an outdoor eating area. Those tables are very rusted. It's, again, a safety issue. And then the indoor cafe tables, Dr. Farley, can you explain where they're at and what they...
So upstairs at the top of the rotunda, I think the board maybe has been up there for a program before. There's a nice area up there, so they're looking for an upgrade, and students use it to socialize and different opportunities and presentations and programs.
First Flight Middle has a significant need for furniture in their building. We have been working towards that a little bit at a time each year, and so she had requested some specific tables and chairs for some of her elective, and so this money would be set aside for that. Last year, because of not being fully funded with our programs, we cut an activity bus, but we were trying to keep them on a rotation so that they don't get so old with so many miles on them that they become unsafe. And so we have included that activity bus this year, as well as a new courier van that takes the mail from site to site. The maintenance, there is an attached detail. That's several projects that Russ will oversee. They are for schools. It's not just district level, but he will oversee all of those projects. And then finally, school nutrition has a need for the three items that you see there: a flat top range, a pass-through warmer. I think that she's asked for that maybe last year, and we didn't fund that either. And then the double stack oven just went out while we were in the midst of doing this budget process. As I mentioned, the next sheet is the outline of the projects that Russ and his team will oversee. These are requests from various schools, as well as things that Russ and his team have identified throughout the district that need to be addressed. I'm gonna give you just a minute. I'm not gonna go through each one. If y'all just want to look at that, if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
A lot of these items are rotational, like carpets and painting and so on and so forth.
Are we good? We can move on? Okay, school nutrition. As I mentioned earlier, school nutrition is supposed to serve just as a business and support itself. As we all know, that has not necessarily happened. A lot of that has to do with participation. We need parents to let their students eat our meals, and then we have participation, then we get so much of a reimbursement. If parents would fill out free and reduced applications, that would help as well. But we have a balanced budget that we hope that is how it will end at the end of 2022. But we have looked at salaries. I did get with Kalita and see is there some areas that we can cut some cost. Through this pandemic, she has realized that she can offer some really nice meals and not and we can reduce some costs next year. And so we've looked at reducing some of the food costs as well as the supply cost. So we have tried to trim that budget down in an effort to make it profitable. She has been doing well this year, but that is because the reimbursement rate is higher at summer feeding. We're on a different reimbursement rate now as a result of the pandemic. Next is the after-school program. Again, I got with Kelly, who's now overseeing that program, and asked her about staff. As a result of the pandemic and people didn't have employment, they naturally went elsewhere and found employment. So we had several vacancies. But in discussing that with Kelly, she's confident that we can maintain our level of service with the staff that we have, be in compliance with ratios and that type of thing. And so we are very hopeful, optimistic that as we approach 21, 22, that we will have a profitable after-school program. So we're hopeful. We're trying. So we did look, we cut costs there. Personnel is very expensive, and that's where we've trimmed some of the cost. As I mentioned earlier, student fees, there is a section for that. However, we are not proposing any increases to student fees for the coming fiscal year. And finally, there's a glossary, just so if some of the acronyms we throw out, or as I reference the different allotments, guaranteed position, dollar, there's some notes in there regarding that. Are there any questions?
It's pretty much cut and dry. Thanks, Candy. Appreciate your work.
I said it's very clean and easy to understand. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So the board will formally vote on the budget against CIP in April, and then the rest of the public school budget in May. So thank you, Candy. Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Candy. Excellent. I know you guys all work hard to come together and make all this stuff happen.
Madam Chair, I move we adjourn.
Well, David, hold on a minute. Does anybody else? Carl, do you have any questions? Anything you want to add? Anybody else? Frank?
Just, Candy, a superb document, really. I mean, just superb. Well done.
Thank you.
I'd like to echo what Joe just said. I appreciate all the presentations that put forth, and it really helps to get the focus a lot clearer. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, David, go ahead.
Already said it.
Motion from Mr. Twitty to adjourn. Do we have a second? Second for Mr. Tauber. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you all.